Thank you for coming on this dark and stormy night to the second meeting of the Climate Crisis Committee, public meeting. Before we begin our program, I'll give an opportunity for members of the public who wish to say something. Mr. Rowley?
Hello, I just want to let everyone in this room know about another climate organization in Belfast that is going to have a meeting this Thursday, also at 6 p.m. And what the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee does is at the local level, it is moving forward on response to climate change. What we do with Citizens Climate Lobby is we have a policy we're advocating for at the national level. It's not the whole solution, but it's part of the solution. It's called carbon fee and dividend. It's basically making carbon more expensive, so all alternatives are relatively better and more cost effective, and it will foster innovation. And this Thursday isn't just any other meeting for Citizens Climate Lobby, because a week from tomorrow, 33 people from Maine go to Washington and talk to our representatives directly and advocate for one particular piece of legislation. And on Thursday, we're going to try to explain that legislation, and we're going to ask people right there in the meeting to pick up their phone or write a letter to be taken to Washington. And on Friday morning, I'll take those letters to one of our volunteers who's going to be flying down on Friday to deliver them personally to our representatives. So please come on Thursday for a presentation about HR 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. Thank you.
Where is it?
Is that here? Is it?
Right here,
Oh, right.
6 p.m.
Thursday.
So, this reminds me, we should mute our phones if we can during this meeting. I always forget to. Thank you, Paul. So tonight, as I said, this is our second public meeting. Our first public meeting, which some of you came to, involved sea level rise and how the community might want to respond to it. I thought that the meeting was successful. We followed up with this meeting to tell you some of the things that the City of Belfast, the committee, and others have done and are planning to do about climate change in general, not just sea level rise. We are going to have 6 presentations. The first presentation will be a review by Hank Reisner of the science and facts concerning global warming in general, its effects on us and the world, and some of the things that we can do to address it. The next 5 sections are going to be 5-minute presentations by various people and groups concerning things that they are doing, want to do, have done, and in which we hope some members of the public will want to participate. After each 5-minute presentation, there'll be 5 minutes for comments from the audience. You may not want to ask questions, at least of the CCC, because we don't have answers yet. We're still creating a program. What we want you to do is to contribute by brainstorming with us as to what should be in that program, and to sign up in the back on sheets we've prepared in case there are any programs you want to engage in. If you want more information, or if you want to actually participate in any of those programs, there's a sheet back there for you to sign up on. The 5 areas we're going to talk about are the Global Covenant of Mayors and how we are on the committee taking a greenhouse gas inventory of Belfast. The second is the Energy Committee's actions and plans for the future. Jonathan Fulford will talk about that. The third will be a presentation by members of the Belfast Area High School with their teacher David Thomas, who are here tonight. The fourth will be 3 different programs we're considering to reduce Belfast's carbon footprint. That includes solar power installations in homes, businesses, and nonprofits, LED lighting, and electrical vehicles. And then finally, there'll be a presentation concerning a Gulf of Maine Research Institute Citizen Science Grant. I'll describe it to you, and that'll be something which you're very specifically requested to participate if you wish. So, at the end of the meeting, or at any time the Spirit moves you, there are sign-up sheets in back. So if you want to sign up to either get more information or to participate in any of these different programs we're talking about, we invite you to sign up. So, without more, Hank Reisner will give a brief presentation about the science.
So maybe these slides could be.
Oh, I figured it out.
So I'm going to do a little talking, really trying to create the context, and the context is probably mostly known by all of you or many of you, but I'm going to review it a bit for people who might be new, or just to create the context for the rest of the presentation tonight. And the real excitement for me is actually what's going to happen after my presentation. So it's really about how we're going to engage in Belfast that John was talking about, the projects that we're excited about initiating and getting collaboration on. So this is us. This is our home. This is our beautiful planet. Almost certainly, virtually everyone is in this room because of this. This is the atmosphere that is pretty fragile and is in fact a very thin layer that supports life on this planet. When you look at the sky, it seems like it's endless, but the truth is it's a very fragile, fairly thin layer of precious gases, elements, warmth. However, this is what we've been doing to it. We've been dumping pollution into our atmosphere. And the results of that are and the causes, actually, I didn't mean to skip ahead. There are other causes that are shown in this slide. There's an ecological crisis as well as what looks like a climate crisis. So we understand that there's some limitations to our presentation and our reach tonight. So these are some of the impacts that are contributing to greenhouse gases, which are essentially the cause of global warming. But I'm going to be focusing more on this, which is really the largest source of global warming pollution, is the burning of fossil fuels. And this graph shows what's been happening over the past 120 or 30 years, especially since 1950. And the result of the burning of these fossil fuels is causing this. This is a little graph showing what's happened to average global surface temperatures. This is a little graph showing what's happening in Maine over those same years. The same graph, the same trajectory is increasing temperature in our atmosphere. When the atmosphere heats up, the oceans heat up. And it turns out that the oceans are really a heat sink, and they're absorbing a huge percentage. I've seen numbers in the low 90% of all the heating that is happening in our atmosphere is actually being absorbed into the oceans. This is a little snapshot of obviously the North Atlantic area, and it turns out, for reasons I'm not clear on, that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than almost any other place on the planet. And we are seeing and feeling the impacts of that now. These are also some of the things that we're going to be talking about, is that this is what is happening because of this warming, the warming of the oceans, the warming of the atmosphere. We're seeing larger and more dangerous hurricanes. I don't need to list them. They've been happening over the last 4 or 5 years especially, but going back to 2012, Hurricane Sandy in New York, New Jersey, and these are the kinds of results that we're seeing besides the actual destruction of property and the harm to people. We're seeing huge floodings because of these big storms. And the reason that is, this is another slide that is what happens when the atmosphere heats up. A warming atmosphere can absorb and hold more moisture, and that moisture is being released in things like this, which are called rain bombs by some people. They're happening all over the world. They're devastating. They cause immediate, intense flooding when they occur. This is a little graph also about Maine, and you can see that the annual precipitation has been going up in recent years in Maine, even though we've also had intermittent periods of weeks and weeks or even months of what look like drought in Maine. And that's one of the symptoms of the climate crisis, is erratic and intense climate changes and weather changes. Needless to say, flooding is happening in other places in the world. It's not just in Maine or in the United States, North America. This is a slide of Portland in 2015. There was a big storm in 2015. This is what parts of Portland look like. And this is our very own Belfast Bay in 2017. There was a storm surge, a lot of wind, a high tide event, and here's our own harbor master doing some cleanup the day after that storm. Along with storms that are bringing moisture and devastation at that level, we're also seeing, because of the heat, we're seeing droughts. Needless to say, heat causes evaporation. So over land, the moisture is being pulled out of the land, out of the earth, and droughts are happening in various places in the world. There's a drought presently in the southwest of North America, of the United States. They're happening on a regular basis. I'll talk about droughts a little bit later about it in reference to crops and food. This is also what we're seeing. You've looked at the news in the last few days. California is experiencing another series of devastating fires. A new fire just started just north of Los Angeles in the last day or so, as well as the huge fire up in near San Francisco in Northern California, Marin County area. This is the other impact that is going to become increasingly significant. It's already significant, but is that food and plants and crops are sensitive to heat. And they're certainly sensitive to drought. And of course, flooding is devastating to farmland. Earlier this spring, there was this huge flooding in our upper Midwest. I don't know, I heard radio programs, interviews with farmers who were at the edge of, if they didn't get their crops in by a certain time, they were going to be in big trouble. And I don't know the results. I've seen some news stories that a number of farmers are going bankrupt in the upper Midwest. So the impact on our food supplies are significant. Clearly the heating of the oceans and the acidification of the oceans are having an impact. I didn't know this. I saw this slide and decided to use it. I do know that animals, and I'll pick up on this again in a little bit, but that animals and fish in particular are moving because of the warmth in the ocean. And there's clearly our studies done, and the migration of various fish and shellfish are seeking cooler water because of the warming of their environment. This is another slide. This is really specifically about acidification hurting the oyster farms. Also, we're seeing economic impacts. I mean, clearly, we've seen that tornadoes and hurricanes cause incredible damage to property, not to mention the loss of life. But the economic impacts are constantly escalating over the recent years. It turns out that in 2017 was the highest cost year on record for the United States. And there's the number. It was about $308 billion, according to NOAA's data. I wanted to make a note that the costs were down in 2018. There weren't as many severe storms last year. But notably, over the last almost 40 years, the costs due to natural catastrophes, almost certainly exacerbated by climate change, has been in the $1.6 trillion range for our country. I've seen this phrase both stated out loud in various places. I saw some medical professionals in New Zealand and in other places in Europe and the United Kingdom describing the climate crisis as a public health crisis now. And these are some of the ways we see what that health crisis looks like. This is a really dramatic one. I haven't had personal experience with the movement of tropical diseases, but I know that it's happening. Diseases that and insects, et cetera, that have lived in the tropics are able to move into warmer climates that will sustain them. Needless to say, I guess, the health impacts of droughts and heat waves are things like heat stroke, heart attacks. Just this past year were some of the hottest recorded temperatures in history in places like Alaska, in Paris, in parts of Europe, Italy, certainly in parts of southern Asia, parts of India. We're seeing temperatures in the 120s, certainly in the Middle East. Those temperatures are at some level actually unlivable, and they keep reaching new records each year. And this is another thing we're seeing. Again, some people aren't connecting these dots, but it's pretty well known that there are migrations happening. Some in the Middle East, certainly the Syrian migration of refugees, has been directly linked to crop failures and drought in Syria in the 2006, 7, 8 kind of time period. Many of the refugees from Central America, there are other factors always as well. There's politics and violence happening in their countries, but is that there is an ongoing drought in Central America that is making people move. We all know, or many of us know, that we are now deep into what is being called the 6th mass extinction. So how are we responding to all of this? There are actually two ways that we're responding, and I'm just going to say this briefly, but the two approaches are mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies. And basically, mitigation strategies are an attempt to either slow down or stop or reverse, if at all possible, the effects of climate change. And adaptation strategies are essentially trying to deal with the effects as they arise, or possibly plan for the effects as they arise. Some of those mitigating strategies we all know about. We have sun, solar energy, and the use of alternative energy sources like the sun or wind has been growing exponentially over the past dozen or 20 years and continues to accelerate. There are places in the world that are reaching levels of electrical energy production in the 50% through the use of wind. Places like Scotland, parts of Australia, southern Australia. This is the graph that is showing some of how we're responding. World photovoltaic installations are accelerating, again, geometrically. Here's a solar farm in Georgia. Large-scale solar farms are now becoming much more common. This is, of course, a local version of how solar energy can work. This is a Belfast house with some solar panels on it. And then electrical vehicle use is also growing rapidly all over the world. They've been doing predictions over the last few years, and those predictions are falling short of what's actually happening. You recognize this EV charger in Lincolnville. We also have one here in Belfast, just around the corner. I think we're getting a few more maybe later this year. This is also a mitigation strategy. It's essentially the opposite of deforestation. It's reforestation or supporting forests, planting trees. And these projects are happening in many places in the world. Some to scale that is really quite remarkable. Places in China that are using part of their military to plant millions and millions of trees in different parts of China. And projects in South America. I've heard of projects in Peru and Ecuador. And clearly afforestation is an attempt to use a natural system to do what it does best, which is it absorbs carbon dioxide. It actually uses carbon dioxide in its processes. This is something that was just talked about by Paul. So this is also a mitigation strategy, which is to affect policy. And this is, in its essence, is an attempt to put a price on carbon and make the use of carbon less attractive through economic models. Many economists in the world are supporting this project, this approach. Most of us maybe know about what happened in 2015. There was an agreement made in Paris. The world came together to make this agreement. It was historic. Some of the commitments are happening and are underway in a number of countries. Certainly some countries are falling short. There's a lot of work to be done on this commitment. There's a new meeting coming up in a couple of months in Chile that is going to be a follow-up to some of this decision making. So this is a note that seemed handy to have on this slide. And certainly conservation efforts are mitigation strategies. You may recognize this is Window Dresser Project in full bloom. This is a local Maine-based organization, mostly volunteers, making these window inserts. It's a way to conserve energy. Incredibly cost-effective and effective at saving both money and energy in people's homes. This isn't exactly a mitigation strategy, but this is sort of what's happening in many places in the world over the last few years. Certainly over the last year, young people, students, and others are actually taking to the streets, demanding real action in solving the climate crisis. I have a hard time not putting this photo up. This is, many of you know, this is Greta Thunberg, possibly the most well-known, not the only, but the most well-known youth leader in the world today. And these are some of our very own Maine students. Last April in Augusta, talking to legislators, making their voices heard. This is the other strategy, and I'm going to do a little reading. I have a few slides for this, but adaptation, I'm going to read it here. Adaptation means anticipating the adverse effects of climate change and taking appropriate actions to prevent or minimize the damage they can cause, or taking advantage of the opportunities that may arise. We know what some of those are, but almost for sure, many of the adaptation strategies haven't happened yet. They're going to be in development as the climate crisis continues. But examples of adaptation, I mean, some things are well known in the news. South Pacific Islanders and South Asian peoples are literally moving to higher ground in face of sea level rise. In Miami, they have set up huge pumps to pump the water out of the streets of Miami. Seems like a crazy attempt, but that's what they're doing. They're also raising roads in Miami, streets. In Rhode Island, they were last summer, 2 summers ago, have been relocating shoreline summer houses in Rhode Island. Boston has initiated this year, over the last couple of years, a large plan to utilize barriers of different kinds, both hard and soft natural barriers in and around Boston Harbor, the Charles River. Changing and utilizing building codes and how we use our land or where we build would be an adaptation strategy that would be relevant to Belfast, in fact, as well. So some of these things are actually probably happening. I've seen notes about this. I haven't done a lot of research on this, but because of crop failure, because of drought and or flooding, different kinds of crops are being grown in places that they hadn't been grown before. There is some development in the works to develop more heat-resistant crops. Clearly, supporting local farming is a mitigation strategy as well as an adaptation strategy. If you buy your food close by, you aren't paying the cost of driving it across the country from California. So local farming is both. I'm not sure about the fishing world as well. I imagine that if the fish are moving, the fishermen are going to be moved. The fishing people are going to be moving. Or there will be less fishing. We've seen the crash of fisheries over the last 20 or 30 years as well in and around Maine and the Maritimes. Another adaptation certainly is likely to be part of this is land-based fish farms. I'm certainly not a medical person, but some of the responses to the dangers of health impacts in Asia and even in the United States, people have been closing schools on hot and smoggy days because of air quality. I've seen notes and ideas about counseling the elderly about weather and heat days and cooling, the possibility of having cooling centers for people. Almost certainly there might be new medical treatments as things develop. And clearly our behaviors matter. So a plant-based diet is a mitigation strategy in the way that works. It's cheaper and less impact to eat plants than it is to eat meat. Our behaviors as far as transportation, walking more, bicycling of course, flying in airplanes less, consuming less, sharing more, recycling more, and of course, in the policy level, supporting leaders and representatives in creating policy, better policy. And at some point, almost certainly, we will be responding to climate refugees at some level. I just wanted to finish with this. We really do know the causes of the climate crisis. We have many robust solutions, and we have great technologies that are in constant development. And I say that we have growing public opinion and support for real climate action. And the question with the youth that in particular are leading this movement for climate action is how quickly will we respond? How quickly and how robustly will we engage? And I think that really leads into the rest of the program, because that's the real juicy part of this evening, is what happens next. So what's been going on in and around Belfast, and what's going to be happening next. And John may want to preface the next presenter.
Thank you, Hank.
Sure.
So I realized I did not introduce myself. I'm John Beal. I'm the chair of the Climate Crisis Committee. Just to follow up on one of Hank's last points, the speed and the robustness with which you respond is really important. People talk about coming to tipping points. There are some self-reinforcing cycles which are at work. For instance, when sea ice is in place in the Arctic, it reflects a lot of sunlight back to space. When it melts, it allows the water to warm more. Likewise, when the permafrost melts, it releases massive amounts of methane. Methane is one of the most effective methane gases. So things are moving rapidly, and we propose to take action on them. We're going to talk tonight about mitigation strategies that we've decided to pursue. We are thinking globally, acting locally. We've recognized that if we mitigate the climate crisis here in Belfast, it won't solve it, but it's a start, and we can lead with our actions and our words. So with that, I'd like to introduce the first of our 5-minute presenters. After the 5 minutes, there'll be 5 minutes for comments and questions. And again, anyone interested in any of the presentations can sign up for more information or to participate. Emma Swartz and Joe Duggan will now talk about the Global Covenant of Mayor program that we are instituting.
Hi, I'm Emma. I believe I'm the vice chair of this committee.
You are that?
Not rarely. I rarely have to do anything about that because John is such a good chair. And I'm excited to be the first one to tell you about something that we've been doing that you can be really excited and proud about, which is the Global Covenant of Mayors. It's a program that Belfast joined in February of this year. And basically what it is it's a bunch of cities getting together to commit to holding themselves to the standards that the UN sets for everybody, even if our federal government doesn't force us to do it. It's like just cities deciding to do that themselves. And a lot of cities have signed on to this, thousands of big and small cities. According to their website, those cities include 700 million people, which is a tenth of all the people in the world. So it is like making a big impact out of many small little contributions from cities, and collectively reducing 1.3 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every year. So signing on to this has several steps that means we committed to do. The first one is to do a pretty thorough greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the whole city of Belfast. So we've just started this because we signed up in February, but then we spent a long time working on the reports we talked about at our last meeting about sea level rise. So we're starting this greenhouse gas inventory now, and we're going to be trying to figure out all of the energy that all of you use and everyone else in Belfast and the businesses in Belfast and the products that come into and go out of Belfast. And then after that, the next step is to set goals to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and they should be goals that are hopefully ambitious and measurable and have a time limit on them so that we can make sure they're things that we can really achieve. After that, the next step is to make plans for to lower those emissions in a to lower emissions, develop in a sustainable fashion, and to provide access to renewable energy to more people with plans to make reports at regular intervals so that we're accountable for what we're doing. And all of the plans that we make and start to implement have to meet the standards of the UNFCCC, which is that Paris Agreement that Hank was talking about. So if you like the sound of that, you should thank your city councilors for signing on to a really awesome and ambitious plan of action for figuring out, importantly, what our emissions actually are and then reducing them. And since we're just starting the inventory process, I thought I would just quickly tell you how we're doing that, which is they've set it up like when you sign on to this Global Covenant of Mayors, there's a lot of resources from all the other cities that are doing it and instructions. It's a big project, but they do give some instruction and help with completing it. So we're going to be looking at 5 categories of our emissions, which are stationary energy, which is like all the buildings in town, transportation, and those are the 2 kind of like biggest categories in general for most towns. And then there's also waste, industry, and agriculture and forestry. And we are hoping to probably join a thing called the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, which just gives assistance to people who have signed on to this specific thing. And there's, tools and software that you can then use to also track your greenhouse gas emissions. And about 10 years ago, Belfast did a greenhouse gas inventory, which Joe wanted to tell just a little bit about.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you an example of that this has been done before. In fact, Camden did it for the high school students last year, which is amazing. Belfast did this in 2007, and they looked at this data. And I think it's really important to gather this objective data. The more objective data we have, the better it is for the city council, for all of us to know where our energy is being used. So for instance, in 2007, looking at 100% of this, transportation went for 45%. And our residential use was 37%. You can see you're getting almost up to 100% with those 2 categories. Waste is 0.3, industrial use was 5%, commercial use was 14%. So there are ways that we can look at and things you can look at, but I think it's important, this objective data gathering that we're doing, so we can tell people where is the biggest bang for the buck, and where is the issue we need to address first and most. So I don't think this will change much, these percentage categories, but it'll be nice to know in 2019 or 2020, whenever we decide exactly what we're using and how we're using it. Yeah.
Do you want to say what the categories were that had the most and the
Yeah,
least?
transportation had 45%, and residential had 37%. So what we're using and what we're driving, who's driving through Belfast, is contributing to almost half of what we're using. So there are issues right there to see what can we jump on first and what's the most important to jump on.
So I guess if you have feedback or questions, I can try to answer them, but we did just start this and we haven't really gotten into doing it yet. So I might not have every answer.
Do you all have any plans to ask the people who are making the comprehensive plan to consider putting carbon use or whatever, you know, how do new businesses impact our attempt to have a low carbon footprint? And
Emma, just for the film, can you repeat the question? So
Oh, sure.
Otherwise I can't hear it.
So the question is, do you have any intention of asking the city to look at incoming businesses to see how to make them meet certain standards that would keep our carbon footprint low?
Yeah, okay, so the question was, in the new comprehensive plan that the city is working on, will we be asking them to look at new business development and keeping that low carbon emissions? And I think the answer is yes. I don't know that we have a list of really specific asks about the comprehensive plan. Like, we haven't, agreed on a specific list of exactly what we're going to ask them to include, but we have been talking about how we hope that climate change and greenhouse gas emissions will be on everyone's minds while they're working on that. And I think that would probably go under the heading of sustainable development in the future rather than
I think
unsustainable.
the broader answer is, A, we have not started developing any recommendations.
Right.
B, that would be really part of the climate action plan you're talking about, making recommendations about changing the way the comprehensive plan is done. That would just be our recommendation to the city council. And C, I think it's fair to state that there will be public input before any climate action plan is developed or adopted, at which people will have every opportunity to speak.
Yeah, that is the third step, and we're on step 1 right now, which is make the inventory and then set goals of how much we want to reduce and then figure out how to reduce. But I think your suggestions are good and they're within the realm. Yes? Sorry, you're both sitting there.
I would just wanted clarification on this process of evaluating. Is it evaluating financially? Because I thought this earlier evaluation that you talked about that happened in '07 was mostly based on economics. How much did the fossil fuel cost? How much wastage was being done? But it all had to do with economics versus the carbon footprint. So I'm confused. Which way are you going to be measuring these things?
So the question was, how are we going to measure? Is it measuring like dollars spent on this or the actual carbon footprint? And so for this, I think maybe for both inventories, but definitely for this one, we're going to be focusing on the actual tons of carbon dioxide emitted by all these activities.
Yes, and I just really wanted to present how the categories fall into place a little bit as a general category. But we're looking at the carbon footprint coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned stationary energy, transportation, waste, industry, agriculture, and forestry. Is also power usage one of the, because that would be obviously tied to the carbon footprint?
I believe
Is
it
that one of the
comes under
statistics?
commercial and industrial.
Okay.
I think all of those categories can include power usage. So the stationary energy section, for instance, is a big one where that's all of the buildings in town. So like the buildings will use power and we'll be measuring that in that section. And then in the waste section, if the processing of waste takes power and energy, we'll be measuring that as well. So it kind of, I think all the different places where power gets used in town is basically what we are trying to figure out and calculate. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And then just a follow-up question. So for the stationary part of it, does that include embedded energy from, the materials? Would that be included in the carbon
I believe
footprint? Because often that's included. So.
Yeah, I believe that is included. It's like the energy that it took to produce the building.
Right.
Yeah.
And when we do this, we're following the guidelines from the national organization, which so we're not mixing apples and oranges, where we want to mix apples and apples. So we're really following their guidelines. There's a formula we have to follow. And so it'd be interesting if you wanted to know what it is. So,
Do you know if the embedded carbon footprint, do you have off the top of your, off the top, do you know, is that over a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year mortgaged out? Do you know by?
I don't know that yet
We
because
can
we
talk
just
later.
started.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay,
Great.
shall we? Oh, there's one more.
I was thinking of a more personal, like, you know, these people that are living in these buildings, or houses, or whatever, and their personal approach to, you know, being careful not to use more carbon than they have to. So is there any place where people sign up and say, well, I'm doing this habit, and that's saving energy, or I'm doing this habit, I'm not buying any more clothes, or anything, you know, there's these, I'm eating less beef, whatever they think would help. But it sounds like it's more of a municipal, you know, you've got these levels that are gonna be measured through all these, and it's not a personal thing at all. I mean, you don't sign up and say, hey, I got solar panels and I'm driving a Prius, stuff like that.
Well, of course, we think it's great when people do get solar panels and drive a Prius, but I think the part of the Global Covenant of Mayors agreement that talks about setting the goals, where it says they need to be measurable and happen in a certain amount of time, I think most of those things that we would be recommending to implement and planning in our climate action plan would maybe include reaching out to the community and just sort of encouraging them to use less, but I think most of the solutions we would really be looking at are things that, you know, things that are like a law that the city puts into action that will definitely decrease the carbon by a certain amount. You know, not saying they would make it against the law to use carbon, but
I think if you stay tuned tonight,
yeah,
you'll hear more about getting
I think there'll
Prius
be more
and getting solar
specific,
power.
like, policy ideas in general. And additionally, we also will be encouraging people to just choose to use less energy.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you. Our second presenter is Jonathan Fulford, who has been on the City Energy Committee for some time. And he's going to tell us something about what they have done and what they may do.
Yeah, I think I've been on the Energy Committee somewhere around 5 years. Like, is that how long we've been? Somewhere in that range. It's been a real enjoyable committee to be on. I'd have to say the City of Belfast lost an incredibly good leader when Sadie Lloyd decided to no longer work for the city and run that. She did a great job. Modeled getting things done, which was really fun to be part of. So this is a quick overview of some of the projects that the Energy Committee identified. We looked at how can we reduce the municipal use of energy and the cost to the city, ratepayers and taxpayers by doing that. So we looked at both, like, our goals was both as a climate change motivation, I think, for everybody on the committee personally, but I think that in order to make it so that I think every recommendation we made to the city council, I believe, passed unanimously, it's because we could also show that it saved taxpayer dollars and ratepayer dollars every single time, which is awesome when you have that, you know, it's a no-brainer. Like, nobody's going to say, you know, I want to spend more taxes and increase, you know, well, maybe some people would, but nobody in Belfast was wanting to do that. So probably people are familiar with, there's really 3 primary projects around solar arrays that the city took on. The first one was the firehouse. That was a 44 kilowatt. The second one was the landfill. That was 122 kilowatt. And then we just had also the public works, which was a 660 kilowatt project. All told, that's in dollars, that's about $125,000 worth of electricity, which is offset every year. So I'm not sure the payback on these. Most of these were the payback for the rate for the before it's basically completely paid off is usually around 11 or 12 years, and the length of lifespan should be about 40 years. So it's a great deal for a municipality. The LED street lighting retrofit, that should, I don't have a kilowatt savings on that one, but the savings for the city in dollars is about $70,000 a year. That's not all just lower electrical use, that's also CMP charged an outrageous amount for renting. So another reason, anyway, I won't get into CMP, but as a corporation. But so anyway, that's a great thing that also is reducing our carbon footprint significantly, as well as reducing the cost for taxpayers. One of the things I thought was most exciting we took on was when we looked at the energy use of the municipal buildings and services, the single largest energy use was the wastewater treatment plant. So it's like, okay, well, if you can make a 10% savings on wastewater treatment processing, that's a lot better than a 50% savings on something that has very little impact, right? So where could we gain on wastewater treatment? So I'm super excited about wastewater treatment. So, and the largest energy use is the blowers that blow the air into the ponds. And so we looked at energy costs and processes that can be improved. And so in the $2.5 million upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant, it was a key component of that was how can we reduce the energy use of both the process but also the facility itself. And that's been a really exciting thing to do. I can't tell you what offhand. I wish Sadie Lloyd was still here because she has like the numbers down cold, but it's a pretty major reduction. I'm not sure the percentage, but it was quite a measurable reduction in the energy that we'll be using. Part of it was also ventilation. The building was completely inadequately ventilated, would never meet current OSHA regulations, and so in order to meet current OSHA regulations for the health and safety of the workers, we had to get a lot more air moving through that building. And by doing heat exchangers, we could both save energy over even what we were using currently, but also massively increase the amount of ventilation and make it so that when you're in the control room in there, it's not 120 degrees in the summer, which is I think what it's about up to. It was like cooking if you ever visited a place in the summer. So that's pretty neat. I thought that was great. Future projects. We also looked at the energy use of the buildings within that the city is the ownership of, and looked at LED lighting upgrades. Some were done, and the heating and how much heat pumps we can put in, and kind of what can we really take on as a municipality for these buildings. I think that ones we were looking at as next projects were around the police station and the library in particular. The library, this is a really complicated building as far as the way it was designed and built. It's a real challenge. The architects were not thinking about this. So if you know anybody who's an architect, have a conversation with them. They have still not, as a group, really quite gotten on board as well as they should be about they'll design a house that looks really cute and has twice the exterior perimeter than a box. And that is a crime because it just is wrong. The other thing that's also pretty exciting is that LED 1711 passed, and that basically changes it's the solar policy on a state level, and it makes large-scale commercial solar possible in a way that was not for the last 8 years. And I think that one of the things we're looking into is there a way that Belfast is there other additional places or ways in which a commercial array may make sense for the city, both for taxpayer purposes, but also for lowering carbon footprint. So, yeah.
So it's incredibly laudable what you've done for the city buildings and the city use. And of course, that's a part of the picture. You're talking about having solar arrays that might benefit the general public. Are you thinking now of expanding the role of what you're doing so that, for instance, we might have a municipally owned power company or other ideas that we as citizens can take advantage of, whether it's, electric power generators that generated by our own solar panels or things like that?
Right. There hasn't been a lot of talk about that yet. I think that as the growth of the Climate Crisis Committee, I think that we have twin committees that have had somewhat overlapping but slightly different kind of areas of kind of like this is where we're looking at and working at, and I think that there is enough overlap, and I think as going forward, I think it would be better kind of synergetic cooperation and participation. That thing like a city-owned utility that has been a really successful thing in some parts of the country. That may be a great benefit. There's also been programs where like Freeport and I think Bangor's doing it and stuff like that, where the city organizes basically a collective buy for lowering the cost of installing solar on residential or commercial properties, and usually about a 10% reduction in cost is what I recall from different solar installers. So when you do a group buy, that's something that we haven't done yet. Obviously, it could either be the energy, or it could be the Climate Crisis Committee, but I think that'd be a great thing. So, and I think any ideas, we're going to be having there isn't scheduled yet, but there'll be another Energy Committee meeting. There hasn't been one for a little while. But as we get going again, I think input and ideas are always welcome. That'll be good. Any other questions? All right.
I think it's also fair to state that the Energy Committee has been focused on municipal use and savings, and the Climate Crisis Committee is going to be focusing on private and commercial. We've left the bailiwick of municipal to John's group. There's a reason for that. The city can tell the city people what to do, and they go and do it. This Climate Crisis Committee is going to essentially herd as many cats towards energy efficiency as we can, but it's a different process. So we told the city council the other day that our new program, our new expanded program, which I'll describe to you in a little while, is going to involve a lot of collaboration between our two committees. We intend to learn from the Energy Committee because they've done a huge amount of research and work, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that city government has been very supportive of this effort every step of the way. It's been a real privilege and honor to be working with the city government on these things. There's not been pushback at all. It's been like, okay, this makes sense, let's do it. So it's been good. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Our third presentation is by a group of students, the Climate Crisis Club at Belfast Area High School, who, with their science advisor, Mr. Thomas, have come to us tonight to make a presentation.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We are the Climate Crisis Club at the high school here in town. My name is Sid, and we'll introduce ourselves when we speak. But basically, we're here to talk to you kind of about like what we've done so far this year, and also like how anyone here who wants to help us can help. So far, we've done the September 20th like climate strike that happened across the country. Like we had a school walkout during lunch. A bunch of people did it. We had signs and everything. And we've also started planning, and then for like getting solar panels and composting and a greenhouse at the high school. And we've negotiated with the school so far. They're on board. We have Revision Energy coming in to do an estimate or something. But basically we're in like the planning stages, but we have the school on board and we're like ready to go. So, yeah.
I guess I'll start off. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our process with getting composting in the school. So we've talked to a teacher at our school named Randy Nichols, and he right now is kind of running the compost, but it's limited to just the kitchen, so just the like lunch ladies and stuff are doing the composting right now. But we want to, put out a couple buckets in the cafeteria, make it available for students to get involved and put their food in there. And then we actually have already an area where we can compost at the school. It was built by some AP Environmental Science students a couple of years ago. And so it's readily available to us. Like, we kind of have all the logistics figured out, and we have like approval from the school and everything. So we just have to kind of get on it, I guess. But we're in the process of that now, which is kind of exciting. And
yeah, on one of our bigger scale projects is solar panels. We're still in the early stages of that. We haven't done much, but I've emailed and called Revision Energy to get an estimate at our school, and after that we hope to take some further steps, like present in front of our school board to make sure that we really can do this. And what we're asking from you is if any of you have any like expertise about like solar energy or any recommendations for things, there is a sign-up sheet in the back, and just any information we can get in contact with you, that would be great.
But yeah, we would love any recommendations you have, and obviously you guys have more experience working on this than we do, just as a student organization, and so we would appreciate anything that you guys can do to help. Thank you.
Yeah.
any
We're good.
questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know if the school has done an energy audit to see what could be done, short of solar panels, but to
Yeah.
increase the efficiency of the building?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we do have some reports about energy usage in the school, where the most energy is used, things like that, and we can hopefully use that to see what we can do, even if we can't get like solar panels as a full school thing, maybe here and there for places that use the most energy, or just see how we can cut back on our energy usage.
I think also during the construction that they just did at the school, they did work a little bit. I mean, they did like LED lighting and stuff, so I'm sure they did some sort of work with that during the construction, so.
Yeah, it's Siemens Corporation. They were a lot involved in the project, and they did a lot of various sensors built into the heating systems, where, for example, and lighting systems as well, where the lights would automatically go off through their motion detectors. And also, the heating system has sensors in it with CO2 levels. They can read CO2 levels, and when CO2 levels go down to a certain point, then that's like an indication of nobody in the room, and so the temperature goes down a little bit. So there's a lot of automatic timing like that. And so Siemens Corporation, we need to get in contact with them and get some more information maybe as to what they did.
Yeah.
Are there any initiatives that you're trying to encourage students to, let's say, not sit in their cars idling in the morning and burning up gasoline, or open up windows in your room in the wintertime because you want a little fresh air, or whatever? Are there any things you're doing to modify student behavior to be energy efficient?
There's not right now, but that's a great idea, and we might start something like that, because that would be really effective, probably.
Yeah, and I think our first focus will just be to get kids to start composting once we have that program
And
going.
what about trash, just like paper, plastic?
Yeah, we have
all that
recycling
stuff.
in
So
most
you do
classrooms
have
and
to
everything.
do
Yeah, I
it
think
good.
so.
Mhm.
Yeah,
We're
we
good
also
on that, so.
have added metal like cutlery, which is
Yeah.
good because
Okay.
like it reduces the amount of plastic cutlery waste that,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and it would be good to see like you're given an option now to take the plastic saran wrap around your sandwich, so they are adding these options. I just
Yeah.
think that it would be good as a committee to
Mhm.
encourage these more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you take this to your homes? You know what I mean? Because a lot of people aren't doing it at the house.
Yeah.
You want to be more clear about your question?
Yeah.
Less subtlety.
Wow. Someone pick it.
Considering that transportation is 55% of our costs, well, have we talked with the buses at all? The bus system, could be maybe
Hybrids.
hybrids or,
Yeah.
No, but in one of our first meetings, we briefly mentioned things that we might want to do, and there are ways for buses to use less fuel. I'm not really sure about that, but maybe that could be a future project where we get in touch with our school buses and figure out how we can cut back on the carbon emissions from that.
I think we also briefly met with the principal at our school, and he mentioned a good maybe project for us to do would be to maybe see if we could get a grant or like invest as a school in some sort of either smaller transportation for like there's a lot of school trips that take only a couple kids but they'll use a big bus and that's kind of not very fuel efficient, or you know even some sort of van or something just to make it a little bit more energy efficient, or even some kind of hybrid or electric vehicle would be awesome.
I would make a suggestion, if you're gonna get a bid on solar panels, get 3.
Okay.
Get 1, get 3.
The
Make
planning
sure
involved.
that the number of panels that the bid comes up with is exactly the same number of panels on all 3.
Okay. Thank you.
Then
Yeah.
you can really compare the pricing on the whole thing.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Have you, I thought that as a group, you were going to be in touch with the Climate to Thrive group in Bar Harbor. There is a high school group in Bar Harbor through Climate to Thrive, and they already were, the kids there already got their entire high school at NDI covered with solar panels. And they've got a whole way of contacting people for funding. There's like a group of investors, and the payback is to the investors, so there's not a lot of, you know, pay up front. So I think, I know that there are people that you can be in contact with up there that will help you in this whole effort to get solar. They've already done it.
If it's any help,
And they know who to contact and,
Climate to Thrive has been in touch with Mr. Thomas.
okay.
Yeah,
Given them the
Yes.
students there who have
Good.
done this, we're ahead of you.
There you
We
go.
have the contact information, we just have to reach out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. Has anybody been in touch with anybody on the school board? Because that would seem like another
Yeah.
place to find out some support or ideas.
Yeah, I think we're planning after we're gonna get the estimates plural first, so that we kind of know we have some like numbers and things to talk about because the school board's gonna want that. But as soon as we get that, we're planning to go before the school board and like tell them like this is what we want, how can we get this, that sort of thing. Yeah.
There actually was last year a presentation in the school board by a past student and the mayor, Parity. They went to the school board and talked about solar panel installation for the high school. I don't know sort of what became of that or where that's at, but they are privy to that sort of desire to.
Yeah, I was just thinking about in terms of transportation, because that's, you know, I see those buses and how empty they are and, you know, all that stuff. That's like a big area. But I know to change a lot of that stuff, we have to take school board pressure probably.
How about a campaign that taking the bus is cool? A lot less driving individual cars to school. Fuller buses. Not that we are not all guilty of the same thing.
That's a good idea.
I think especially since like there's a lot of people who are just like newly getting their driver's license, so
Yeah.
they can't drive anyone else. So everybody's taking like individual cars, so
Yeah.
that makes it even
Yeah.
worse. And,
A lot of
yeah.
people work after school too, and they can't go home and like then go. So
Or even just carpooling could.
better
add to
public,
that.
yeah, better public transportation. Not just school. Like obviously the school needs better, but like we're not obviously like the city climate crisis committee, but better public transportation seems like a really big and important issue that could actually make a really big impact. So
I concur with that.
suggestions to whoever, yeah.
Has there been any thought to switching night football and soccer games to daytime?
I don't
I
know.
haven't heard anything
Yeah, I haven't heard
about
anything about that. Yeah.
But it's something we could possibly talk about
Yeah.
with some of the coaches.
Yep.
Are all soccer games at night? I feel
Not
like
all.
some of them
A lot of them
are
on the
during
weekends during the day, but like there is a lot of night stuff.
Yeah,
too.
most football
especially
games are
'cause
after
it gets dark
7,
now.
so.
Now,
Yeah.
so.
So before you guys sit down, you asked for advice, for input and advice from people. Would you like input on greenhouses,
Anything.
composting, how to write a grant?
Anything. Any suggestions about anything we've talked
Well, I
about?
mean, people in this room have all sorts of skills, so if you tell them what you want,
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you just put your name down, we will, and your contact info, it's on a sheet back there somewhere. We'll get in touch with you, and with like more specific, like, hey, do you know anything about this? Yeah, So anything really, if you have anything.
It might also be helpful if you write down specifically like what skills you
Yeah.
have, like writing
Yeah.
a grant or getting those estimates or
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, what you'd like to help us with, and
Yeah.
we'll get in contact with
Yeah.
you.
Or if you have any like specific contacts that you know, maybe you know someone who works for Revision or you know Sundog Solar or another solar company or something that we could reach out to them.
All right. Well,
Good.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's the hard act to follow. However, it falls to me to do that. And I'm going to present two different subjects. The first is the expanded program that we've decided to adopt. Someone mentioned the Climate to Thrive in Mount Desert Island. One of the things that happened to us recently is we had a meeting with them. And although Hank has been badgering us for a year to adopt some of the programs that ACTT has done, we finally sort of turned a corner, and one of the things we're going to do is we're working with ACTT, that's the Climate to Thrive. Now, they are sharing with us all of their information about how to solarize. I think one of the things that students are going to find out is there are these power purchase agreements, which are fabulous tax abatement programs for rich people. All the power companies have people lined up who want to invest, and if a school, in particular like MDI, buys into this, they have no money up front. The investor buys the solar panels, gets an immediate 30% tax break on their income tax, and then gets the income from the school for the next 6 years. After 6 years, the school can then buy the panel array for a very small price. So it's a way that nonprofits, schools, and other non-individuals can get solar power installed for very inexpensive, no money up front. There are other programs that we're going to learn through ACT where individuals, likewise, can essentially trade their power bill for a rental cost for a solar array. There's a nonprofit which will help them to buy the array and then bill them monthly an amount slightly less than their current power bill. And at the end of the time that they pay it, they own the solar array. So this is another system whereby no money up front, people can go solar. Don't ask me any of the details of that program because we're just developing the information base to do this stuff. One of the reasons we're meeting with you guys tonight is so that we can get your ideas about how to do these programs. If people have knowledge about solar installations, financing, etc., please jot down back there solar installation. We'll want to call on you. Another program we're adopting from MDI is the LED light program. Companies, commercial places can get participate in a program where they can get LED lights for 25% of the cost as an inducement for them to go LED. LED lights cost about 70% less to operate than incandescent lights, so you're saving a huge amount of money each year. That seems like another no-brainer. Another thing we're going to do is give people information about how to get and fill electric vehicles. One of the things that I think we've found is that there are lots of opportunities out there to do the right thing and to save money and the planet, but most people don't know how to do it. I spent about a week going over the electric vehicle rebate program. My wife was thinking about it. It was incredibly complex, but eventually you can figure it out. And what we want to do is create a template and a program whereby people can come to us and we can guide them to how to find out about the stuff and get it done. Same with the solar installations. There's so many programs out there. We want to become a clearinghouse for the Belfast community to learn about and apply those things. So one of the things we want to do is to get information out to churches, businesses, individuals, anybody who wants to either engage in solar installation or to help us in this process. Solar installations, a little sign-up sheet back there. Please sign up. We want your help. We want your input. The fifth, any questions about that? Knowing that I can't give you any answers? The fifth 5-minute section we have today is about a grant we're doing with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. It's a citizen science research project called Flooding in Belfast Bay. And what we're doing is we're studying the weather and tidal situations which result in coastal flooding. As the reason we're doing that is not only so that we can help the National Weather Service refine its predictive programs. We're working with John Cannon and Gray, and we're going to try and follow his requests for information. But we also are trying to create a long-term baseline information for how Belfast Bay is in terms of weather and tides. We have just gotten a weather station. If you go down to the pier, you'll see a mast that has an anemometer up top and a weather station next to it. Thanks to the City Council for financing that. Thanks to Dan Miller of Belfast Boatyard for giving us a 10-meter mast. And thanks to Kathy Pickering, the harbor master, for pushing for it. We now have an operating weather system. GMRI also gave a grant for that. Susan?
Is there going to be a public way of accessing the information that you're getting from the weather station?
Right now, it's solar powered, and the instruments report by telemetry to Kathy's office. There's a console there in which it's downloaded.
Right.
We also have a data log which we'll connect to. We haven't done this yet. I'm waiting for some teachers and high school students to help me with this because they know how to do computers. And we'll hopefully have a computer which will store all the information and which will act as a conduit to the internet, whether underground, whatever. Hopefully it'll be publicly available so the fishermen can find out which way the wind's blowing before they come down. And the boaters, the rowers too. So the second aspect of the grant is measuring tidal surge, and we're planning to deploy sensors, water level sensors, at one or more places around. We haven't figured out where to do it yet. We also want to put photographic posts at certain key points on the shore where we expect erosion to occur. The idea will be for citizen science volunteers to go at high water or high surge times and take photographs of how high the water is coming so that we can document objectively exactly how much water is coming in. Why don't we just trust the tide charts? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, there's no tide station closer than Bar Harbor. The next closest after that is Portland. That's a long way away. And all of our tide predictions are extrapolated from their information. The last time an actual tide gauge was in Belfast was in between 1983 and 85, and at which time they checked their expectations and were able to clarify. But 30 years has passed, the climate is changing, and we want to be able to follow what's actually happening in Belfast Bay, both for purposes of playing out the predictions, and also so the city and the people in Belfast can determine whether or not we are accelerating or not going as fast as expected, what the actual predictions are happening. So this is a program which, as I said, is a citizen science program. We'd love to have as many people in town who want to participate as possible do so. I have a sign-up sheet back there that says citizen science. So if you're all interested in either finding out more or in participating, please sign up. So that ends my presentation. If there are any questions, we have to take them. It's not quite 7:30. Hearing none, I will remind you that our third public meeting will be on Monday, December 2nd. Again, in this room. At that time, we'll probably talk about a subject of mitigation, such as the ones we talked about tonight. The actual subject choice will be based in large part on the kinds of responses we get to our questions about who cares about what and who wants more information about what. So do take a minute to fill out the forms in the back of the room, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.